Welcome to Past Unboxed Audiobooks, where time turns back and stories breathe again. Today, we invite you into a forgotten European town, cloaked in mist and memory, where the ticking of a single clock can change a life forever. This isn't just a story about gears and springs. It's about second chances, unspoken truths, and the quiet power of time to heal what we've lost. So, find a warm place, close your eyes, and let the sounds of the past draw you in. Because some stories aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to be felt. You're listening to the Clockmaker of Vensbruck, only on Past Unboxed Audiobooks. Chapter 1. The Silent Clockmaker. Tucked beneath the gray shoulders of the Hohenfeld Mountains, just along the eastern bank of the Vensbruck River, there lay a city that time had almost forgotten. Vensbruck, ancient, narrow, shrouded in mist, was a place of soft-footed winters and long, contemplative silences. Its streets were lined with slanted, snow-capped roofs and cobblestones polished by centuries of quiet footsteps. Everything about the town suggested that it had once been part of something larger, more important, perhaps a kingdom or empire now lost to history. And yet it endured. It was as though the city itself was waiting for something, or perhaps someone, to remember it. Among the crooked alleyways and the narrow courtyards of Vensbruck stood a peculiar shop at the end of Bruckenstrasse, just opposite the old cathedral whose bells hadn't rung in years. The shop bore no sign, no advertisement, and no welcoming displays in its foggy windows. All it had was a carved symbol above the door, a winged pocket watch, delicate and precise, barely visible beneath layers of frost and peeling blue paint. Inside, the air was warmer than one might expect, not by fire but by time. Hundreds of clocks ticked softly against the walls, their rhythms layered like the notes of an orchestra, some bold and deep, others fine as whispers. Grandfather clocks leaned with solemn dignity against the wooden panels. Delicate mantel clocks rested on shelves next to tiny ticking mechanisms no larger than a walnut. There were clocks with gilded frames, clocks carved from oak, clocks in silver, bronze, and brass. They were not arranged for display, but for memory. Each one told not just time, but a story. The man who watched over them, who kept their rhythm alive, was Elias Grunwald. To the townspeople of Vensbruck, Elias was something between a myth and a memory. He had lived in the shop for as long as anyone could recall. Some said he had been born there, beneath the ticking, and had never left. Others whispered darker things, that he had lost something long ago, and now lived only to wind the clocks, so he would not have to listen to his own thoughts. Elias was tall, slender, and pale with age, his back bowed by years of meticulous labor. His hair had once been black, but now was white as the snow that blanketed the city each winter. His spectacles were thick and round, magnifying the intensity of eyes that missed nothing. He rarely spoke. In truth, most people had never heard his voice. And yet, whenever a clock in Vensbruck stopped, be it a tower bell, a church timer, or a tiny pocket watch, there was only one door they knocked on. Not because they trusted him, but because no one else knew how to fix what time had broken. On the morning that would begin everything, Elias was seated at his workbench beneath the window, hunched over the dismantled remains of a late Baroque pendulum clock. He worked with the devotion of a priest, his fingers moving in steady, reverent motions, coaxing the tiny gears into alignment. Outside, the snow was falling again, thick and silent, muffling the world in white. The only sounds inside the shop were the tick of the clocks, the soft scratching of Elias's tools, and the slow rhythm of his breath. That silence was broken by the sound of the door creaking open. Elias didn't look up. Few ever entered without knocking. "Hello," came a boy's voice, young, unsure. Still, Elias did not lift his head. Footsteps approached, small boots on wooden floorboards, careful but determined. "My name's Lucas," the boy said. "Lucas Bauman. I have something." That caught Elias's attention. Slowly, he raised his eyes. The boy was 10, maybe 11. Freckled cheeks, blonde hair poking out from beneath the wool cap several sizes too big, and a blue scarf that trailed behind him like a forgotten banner. He was shivering slightly from the cold, and cradled in his gloved hands was a bundle wrapped in linen. Elias reached out his hand without a word. Lucas hesitated, then unwrapped the cloth and revealed a small silver pocket watch. It was old, very old. The chain was tarnished, the face cracked, and the hands frozen at 3:16. Yet even in its brokenness, it held an air of quiet dignity. "It was my father's," Lucas said. "He died last winter." Elias took the watch gently, turning it over in his long fingers. He brought it to his ear and listened. Nothing. The silence of it was profound. "I tried winding it," Lucas continued, "but it wouldn't move. I think it's tired, or maybe sad." Elias's expression did not change. He opened the back of the watch with the tip of a worn tool and examined the inner workings. The spring was intact, but rusted. A small gear had come loose and lodged itself between the others. "It can be repaired," he said at last, his voice low and dry like parchment. Lucas's eyes lit up. "Really? Come back in 3 days." The boy hesitated. "How much will it cost?" Elias looked at him a long time before answering. "No charge." "But why?" "Because time should never be buried with the dead." Lucas nodded solemnly, though he didn't fully understand. "Thank you, Mr. Grunwald. I'll come back." He turned and left, leaving a trail of melting footprints behind. When the door clicked shut and the silence returned, Elias remained seated, the watch still in his hand. He stared at it, but his mind had already wandered elsewhere, drifting backward through the corridors of time, through winters long past, and a voice now gone. In the upper right corner of the watch's interior was an inscription, faded but still legible. "To my son, never lose time, nor yourself. M.B." Elias closed the casing with a soft snap. He knew that kind of inscription, knew it too well. That night, Elias lit a candle and carried the watch upstairs to his small room above the shop. It was a sparse space, one bed, one chair, one desk. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books of schematics, mechanical journals, and a collection of leather-bound notebooks. Each notebook bore a year on its spine, carefully written in ink, a record of every clock he had ever built or repaired. But one shelf, far in the corner, held only a single book. Its spine was blank, its pages yellowed. Elias pulled it free and opened it to the middle, revealing a sketch of a pocket watch nearly identical to the one Lucas had brought in. Beside it, in neat script, were notes. Design, M. Baumann, apprentice, 1873. Modification to mainspring, 1874. Given to son, Mathis, 1878. Elias stared at the page until the candle flickered low. The past was not supposed to return. It had been wound down, buried in the dust of passing years. But time, as he well knew, never stayed where one left it. 3 days later, Lucas returned, just as the morning frost began to melt from the window glass. He was early. Elias was already waiting. The watch sat on the counter, its face restored, its gears humming gently beneath its polished shell. "It's alive," Lucas whispered, lifting it carefully. Elias nodded once. "It remembers." Lucas blinked at the strange response, but said nothing. He placed the chain around his neck and tucked the watch beneath his coat. "It still smells like my father," he said, "like old tobacco and firewood." Then he looked up. "Can I come back? Not just for fixing things. I want to learn. I want to make something that lasts." Elias didn't answer right away. He studied the boy, the spark in his eyes, the steadiness in his voice. Finally, he spoke. "After school, 1 hour each day." Lucas beamed. "Really?" Elias gave a small nod. And so it began. Each day after school, Lucas arrived, bundled against the snow, and took his place at the workbench. He asked questions, made mistakes, cursed softly when gears flew across the table. And Elias, silent and steady, watched, guided, and occasionally smiled. The boy reminded him of another, of a time long before silence became a home, of a life he thought he had left behind. Chapter 2. The Boy and the Broken Watch. Snow still clung to the edges of the rooftops as March pushed its way into Vensbruck, determined but not yet victorious. The sun, though brighter than in the months before, was still a cold thing, more a symbol than a source of warmth. Ice hung stubbornly to the edges of window panes, and the streets echoed with the steady drip of thawing gutters. But inside the little shop on Bruckenstrasse, the air was alive with motion. For the first time in decades, the workshop of Elias Grunwald felt like it belonged to more than just memory. Lucas arrived every afternoon at precisely 4 o'clock, always 5 minutes earlier than he promised, breath puffing like steam as he stumbled in with snow-damp boots and wind-reddened cheeks. He would unwrap his scarf, shake the frost from his sleeves, and head straight for the workbench, where tools had already been laid out in neat rows. At first, he was clumsy. His fingers, so used to chalk and slingshots, found it difficult to hold tweezers or tiny screwdrivers. His touch was heavy, impatient. He dropped things. He scratched a watch face once and apologized profusely. But Elias never raised his voice. He simply watched, corrected, and resumed his work. When Lucas asked questions, Elias answered them not with lectures, but with motion. He would demonstrate, quietly, and then hand the tools back to the boy with the same wordless confidence. They spoke rarely in those first weeks, but there was no discomfort in the silence. It was not the heavy, unspoken hush that had once filled the shop. It was the silence of concentration, of a task shared between two people who did not yet need language to understand each other. Yet something inside Elias had shifted. It wasn't just the ticking of clocks that filled his mind now. It was the sound of Lucas humming under his breath while polishing a brass casing. The soft exclamations of, "Oh," or "Wait, why did it do that?" when something moved in a way he hadn't expected. The boy brought sound and motion to a place that had long existed in a kind of suspended animation. And with that sound came memory. One rainy afternoon, as Lucas worked on disassembling the outer casing of a French mantel clock, he glanced up and asked, "How old were you when you started making clocks?" Elias, who had been repairing the escapement on a wall-mounted regulator, paused mid-turn. "7, he said after a long moment. 7. Lucas blinked. "That's even younger than me. I didn't build them then, only studied them." "Who taught you?" Elias hesitated, his hands stilled over the open mechanism. "My father, and his father before him." "So, it's like a family thing?" "It was." Lucas caught the past tense but didn't ask. Instead, he returned to his work, carefully unscrewing the back panel, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Later that evening, long after Lucas had gone and the street lamps flickered into life outside, Elias remained at the workbench. Not working, just sitting. He opened one of the old journals from the back shelf, one not touched in years. Its pages were faded, ink curled at the edges like old bark. He turned to an entry dated March 2nd, 1878. "Mathis wound his first clock today. Said it sounded like a heartbeat in a metal chest." I laughed. He didn't. He was serious. Too serious sometimes. Elias touched the page as though it might vanish beneath his fingers. Lucas's face lingered in his thoughts. So similar, and yet so different. The next day, Lucas arrived with something wrapped in newspaper. "I brought you something," he said, holding out like a gift. Elias raised an eyebrow. "It's a clock," Lucas said. "Kind of. I found it in my grandfather's shed. I think it's broken. Or haunted." He unwrapped the paper to reveal what might once have been a beautiful mantel clock. Now it was charred on one side, the glass cracked and yellowed, its hands warped like bent nails. It smelled faintly of smoke and oil. Elias took it gently, examined the interior. The damage was extensive. The fire had warped several of the gears beyond recognition. It wasn't just broken, it was mangled. "Can it be fixed?" Lucas asked, his voice rising with hope. Elias didn't answer immediately. He ran a finger along the blackened wood. Then he said, "It depends on what you want it to become." "What do you mean?" "Some clocks tell time. Others remember it." Lucas frowned. "So, it's like a memory clock?" Elias gave the faintest smile. "Yes." "Then let's make it one. I want it to remember this year. This shop. These moments." Elias nodded. "Then we rebuild it. Not as it was, but as it should be." And so began the project. Each day, they worked side by side on the ruined clock. They salvaged what they could, fabricated new parts for what they could not. Lucas insisted on designing a new faceplate, etched with tiny stars and a crescent moon. "Because nights pass slower," he said, "and that's when time matters most." Elias let him choose the font for the numerals, delicate Roman letters hand-painted. They replaced the cracked glass with a round window salvaged from an old marine compass. And when the clock was finally reassembled, they wound it together. It ticked, slowly at first, then steadily. Lucas beamed. "We did it." Elias nodded. "You did it." "No," Lucas said. "We." It was the first time Elias had heard that word directed at him in years. Later that week, something unusual happened. A woman appeared at the shop door. Late 20s, wrapped in a green wool coat and a red scarf. Her cheeks flushed from the cold. She knocked, once sharply, then stepped inside. Elias emerged from the back room, blinking at the interruption. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to barge in. My name is Clara Bauman, Lucas's mother." Elias inclined his head. I wanted to say thank you." He looked confused. "For taking him in," she said. "Teaching him. He comes home every day with his eyes glowing like lanterns. He talks about escapements and pendulums and, well, things I don't always understand. But I see the change. I see it's good." Elias looked away, uncomfortable. Clara hesitated. "He told me about the clock you fixed. His father's." Still he said nothing. "Martin, my husband, he was a quiet man, but he loved timepieces. He used to say, 'A man is only as steady as his seconds.'" Elias's eyes flicked to hers. That watch, it was the only thing Lucas had left of him. Clara took a step forward. "I wanted you to know it means the world to us." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "He says he don't speak much, but he listens to you more than anyone else. He trusts you. That matters." And then she was gone. Elias stood in the empty shop for a long time after. That night, he wound every clock in the room himself. Slowly, patiently. Each click of a gear, each turn of key, felt like setting something right. Not just the clocks, but the silence they had guarded for so long. At the stroke of midnight, the entire shop ticked in perfect harmony. A rare thing. And in the corner, on a small shelf by the window, the memory clock, the one rebuilt from ashes, ticked gently beside its younger creator's latest sketch, a design for a clock shaped like a tree, with roots that curved into a pendulum. Time, it seemed, had begun to grow again. Chapter 3. The Timekeeper's Secret. Winter softened its grip on Vensbruck, though not without protest. The snow that once blanketed the rooftops began to retreat, dripping from gables and collecting in muddy rivulets along the narrow streets. The river, once slowed to a near-frozen crawl, resumed its gentle murmuring, as though waking from a long, silent dream. Inside the little shop on Bruckenstrasse, time marched on with more certainty. The clocks no longer ticked in solitary rhythm. They now pulsed with a kind of shared life, brought forth by the daily presence of a boy with curiosity in his hands and hope in his eyes. It had been nearly a month since Lucas had first brought in the broken watch. In that time, he had grown more confident. He could now disassemble a basic pocket watch on his own, clean its components, and reassemble it without supervision. His fingers had learned patience, and his mind had developed a quiet discipline, mirroring the very man who guided him. Elias, too, had changed, subtly but irrevocably. There were days now when he looked forward to the sound of the bell above the door, to the sound of Lucas's boots scuffing across the floor, to the rustling of his coat as he unwrapped his latest project. The silence in the shop no longer felt oppressive. It had become companionable. But even as this new chapter unfolded, shadows stirred in the corners of Elias's mind. Shadows long buried, but not forgotten. One rainy afternoon, Lucas arrived later than usual, soaked through despite his coat. He entered the shop, shivering, and shook the water from his sleeves. "Sorry," he said, teeth chattering. "My teacher kept us longer. Some lecture about King Otto and the Austro-Prussian thing." Elias offered him a dry towel without a word. Lucas dried his hands, then rummaged in his satchel. "I found this," he said, pulling out a small velvet pouch. "It's from my grandmother's attic. She said it used to belong to my grandfather, Martin's father." He opened the pouch and placed a watch on the counter. Elias froze. The watch was unmistakable. It was a Grunwald original, but not just any. The case was deep brass, inscribed with an elaborate filigree along the edges. The face bore not Roman numerals, but a rare script Elias had only used in his earliest designs. At the center, a tiny emblem, an acorn flanked by wings, shone faintly beneath the glass. Elias stepped back. "Is something wrong?" Lucas asked. Elias didn't answer. He reached forward, hands trembling slightly, and picked up the watch. It was heavier than he remembered. The chain was tarnished, the glass faintly chipped, but the structure was unmistakable. He opened the back. There it was, etched in precise script. "MB, for the time you've yet to find." His breath caught in his throat. "MB, Martin Baumann." Elias sat down heavily on the stool behind the counter. He hadn't seen this watch in nearly 30 years. He had given away, lost it, during a time of grief so consuming he barely remembered how the days passed. "You made this, didn't you?" Lucas asked quietly. Elias nodded. "It belonged to my grandfather." "Your father," Elias whispered, almost to himself. Lucas blinked. "What?" Elias shook his head slowly, as if coming out of a trance. "No, nothing. Just memories." But Lucas had caught it. "You said your father. Did you know him?" A long silence fell between them. Elias stood and walked to the window. Rain pattered softly against the glass. Beyond the pane, the cathedral loomed, its broken bell tower cloaked in fog. "I knew of him," Elias said at last. "Tell me." Elias hesitated. "I think I should know," Lucas said. "It's my family." Elias turned and studied him. Not the boy, but the young man beginning to emerge. There was strength in his voice. Not defiance, but conviction. And so Elias spoke. "Many years ago, before you were born, before even your father was born, I had a family. A wife, a son." Lucas sat still, listening. "My son's name was Mathis. He was very much like you. Curious, bright, stubborn. He loved clocks, how they moved, how they ticked, how they kept the world in place. He said time was like a story, and clocks were how we read it." A faint smile passed across Elias's lips. Then it faded. "But Mathis was sick, a condition of the heart. Nothing visible, nothing I could fix. We tried everything. Doctors, medicines, silence, prayers." His hands clenched around the edge of the workbench. One night, during a harsh winter, he collapsed. The doctor said it was the cold, that his heart simply stopped. My wife blamed me. She said I'd taught him to live in the gears, but not in the world. That I'd hidden from life inside my clocks and taken him with me. Lucas's voice was soft. "I'm so sorry." Elias nodded slowly. "After he died, I stopped speaking, stopped making clocks for people. I only repaired them, quietly, alone. Time became a prison instead of a gift." He looked down at the watch in his hand. "This was the last watch I made before I closed the shop to the world. I gave it to a young man who passed through Vensbruck. He was kind, quiet, said he had just lost his mother. His name was Martin. My grandfather." Elias nodded. "He reminded me of Mathis. I couldn't bear to keep the watch, so I gave it to him. Told him it was for the time he hadn't yet found." Lucas leaned back, letting the words settle. "So that means," he began, then paused. "This clock, this connection, it started way before me. In a way, Elias said. Yes. They sat in silence for a while. Then Lucas said, maybe that's why I came here. Maybe it wasn't random. Maybe not. He turned to Elias. Why did you open the door for me that first day? Elias smiled faintly. Because you knocked. That evening, after Lucas had gone, Elias returned to his journals. He opened a new one, blank, untouched. For the first time in over 20 years, he wrote not in the margins of memory, but in the presence of the living. March 24th, 1899. Lucas continues to surprise me. Today he brought back a piece of my past I thought I'd lost, and he asked to know more. He listened. I didn't expect that. Perhaps it is time to speak again, not just with tools and silence, but with truth. And somewhere in the dark belly of the shop, the memory clock ticked softly, not counting seconds, but opening doors. Chapter 4, Storm in the Valley. It began with a sound no one in Vensbruck had heard in years. The wind, not the gentle rustling that moved through pine trees in early spring, but a low, rising growl, like something ancient awakening from beneath the valley floor. The sky had turned the color of wet slate, darkening so swiftly it seemed as though night had skipped ahead several hours. The birds vanished. Even the clocks in Elias's shop ticked with a hesitation they had never known before. By noon, the first tree fell. By evening, the storm had a name. People would later call it the Black Rain, a tempest of such violence that it unroofed houses, cracked the cathedral bell tower, and flooded the lower streets until they resembled rivers more than roads. The valley, once quiet and docile, became a roaring basin of water and wind. In a shop on Bruckenstrasse, Elias watched the storm through a narrow upstairs window. The glass trembled with each gust. He had boarded the door, latched the shutters, moved the more delicate clocks to the higher shelves. But it was not the wind that made his hands shake. It was the boy. Lucas had not come that afternoon, nor the one before. Elias had told himself not to worry. Children were often kept home during storms. The roads had begun to flood. The school had surely been closed. Still, something in his chest tightened with every passing hour. He could no longer read his books, could not concentrate on his repairs. And when the rain began to fall sideways, he knew something was wrong. He descended the stairs two at a time, grabbed his coat, and stepped into the storm. The streets of Vensbruck had become unrecognizable. Rain lashed from all directions, forming curtains of water that blurred buildings into silhouettes. The bakery across the street had lost part of its awning. Flour sacks had spilled onto the wet cobblestones, turning to a pale, sticky paste. The tavern's sign swung wildly, one of its chains already snapped. People were shouting, doors slammed, children cried, windows shattered under the pressure. Elias moved through it all like a man possessed. He hadn't walked these streets in the daylight for years, not since the funeral, but now he ran through them, splashing through ankle-deep water, his coat soaked, his boots heavy, his heart pounding not from exertion, but from fear. He reached the Bauman house just as the lightning split the sky. The cottage sat near the river's edge, in a part of town now half submerged. The front door was ajar. He pushed it open. "Clara!" he shouted. "Lucas!" There was no reply. He stepped inside. Water sloshed across the wooden floorboards. The furniture had been moved, stacked hastily on top of one another, as though someone had tried to flee. Then he saw it, a boot print, small and muddy, leading up the staircase. Elias climbed, each step groaning beneath his weight. At the top, he found Clara. She was crouched in the corner of the attic, clutching Lucas tightly in her arms. Both were shivering. A broken window let the storm in like a scream. Clara looked up at him, her face pale with shock. "Elias." He didn't waste time. "We need to go," he said. "Now." "The river." "It's rising." Clara nodded, her eyes wide. Elias moved quickly. He tore one of the attic drapes free and wrapped it around Lucas. The boy's eyes were half closed, dazed. "Fever," Clara whispered. "It came this morning." Elias reached forward and lifted the boy into his arms. He was lighter than he remembered. The streets were worse on the way back. What had been puddles now surged with rushing water. Debris floated past, buckets, chairs, the carcass of a broken bicycle. Trees groaned and cracked. The sky flared with lightning every few seconds, revealing the skeleton of the city beneath. Elias pushed forward, step by step. He held Lucas close to his chest, shielding him from the wind, whispering to him, though he wasn't sure the boy could hear. "You're not going. Do you hear me? You're not leaving like he did." Behind him, Clara struggled to keep up, slipping more than once. Elias turned back only once, when a sheet of roof tile shattered against the ground behind them. They reached the shop at last. Elias kicked the door open. Inside, the clocks were still ticking, steady, defiant. He carried Lucas upstairs, laid him on the bed, wrapped him in wool. Clara fell to her knees beside him, hands trembling. "I'll fetch the doctor," Elias said. She nodded, but Elias didn't leave. He stood at the doorframe, watching Lucas. The boy stirred. "Don't go," he whispered, barely audible. Elias froze. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in his life, he meant it. The doctor arrived an hour later, soaked, winded, and furious. "What fool dragged a sick child through that storm?" he demanded. "I did," Elias said quietly. The doctor looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Then thank God you did." Another hour, and he might have slipped into something worse. Clara sobbed quietly as the doctor worked. Elias stayed at the threshold, silent, watching, listening, not to the storm, but to the breath, to the tick of the boy's pulse, to the rhythm of time not yet lost. At midnight, the storm began to die. The wind calmed, the rain thinned, and over the ruined rooftops of Vensbruck, the stars returned, tentative, like they too feared what the morning would bring. But in the little shop at 67 Bruckenstrasse, the clocks still ticked. And on the nightstand beside Lucas's bed, the memory clock, repaired by 2 hands and a heart, counted each second with quiet certainty. Chapter 5. The Broken Bell Tower. The morning after the storm, Vensbruck woke to silence. Not the deep, haunted stillness it had once known, but a stunned, reverent quiet. The streets were littered with debris. The river had swallowed the lower part of the town, and rooftops sagged beneath broken chimneys and uprooted tiles. Trees lay like fallen giants, their roots exposed like nerves. The market square was drowned beneath ankle-high water. But above all, it was the cathedral that drew the eyes of every citizen. The bell tower had collapsed. Not completely, but enough. The spire that had stood over the city for centuries, its copper roof greened with age, had been sheared at an angle, leaving it grotesquely open to the sky. The great bell, once the voice of the town, now hung crooked in its frame, silenced for the first time in 100 years. It was as if Vensbruck had lost its heartbeat. Elias stood at the edge of the square with Clara and Lucas, watching the crowd gather in hushed murmurs. Officials, priests, townsfolk. No one knew what to do. The cathedral had always simply been a presence, a permanence. Now it was broken. Will it fall? Lucas asked, his voice still weak from the fever. Not if someone intervenes, Elias said. And will they? He didn't answer, but others were beginning to take notice. It was the mayor who finally turned to Elias, an older man with a graying beard and a look of desperation in his eyes. "Grunwald," he said, "you're the only one who understands mechanisms like this. You've maintained every timepiece in this town for longer than I've been alive. Can you do something?" Elias looked up at the broken bell, swaying gently in its wounded cradle. He felt the weight of the city on his shoulders. For years, they had ignored him, feared him, spoken of him in whispers. Now they needed him. "I'll try," he said. The repair of the tower was not just a matter of strength. It was a matter of precision. The mechanism that held the great bell had been warped. The balance weights and countergears, used to regulate the striking pattern, were misaligned. Worse still, the main shaft that turned the bell had cracked down its center. Elias was given full access to the tower. He He brought Lucas with him. They ascended the stairs together, each step revealing more of the storm's damage. Shattered stone, twisted iron, and damp wooden beams swollen from water. At the top, the great bell hung like a wounded animal, its once proud body streaked with green and rust, its clapper resting awkwardly against one side. The mechanism that surrounded it was massive, a system of pulleys and gears the size of carriages. "Careful," Elias said. "This place remembers every footstep." Lucas nodded, swallowing hard. They worked through the day, cataloging the damage. Elias took notes with meticulous detail, Lucas sketching the machinery in a small notebook. The boy's hand had grown steadier, more sure of itself. By nightfall, they had a plan. The next week passed in labor. Elias opened the doors of his shop, not for customers, but for volunteers. He directed townspeople in crafting replacement parts, measuring iron rods, hammering new brackets. Clara organized supplies. Even the mayor helped transport crates of tools and timber to the cathedral steps. For the first time in decades, the town moved with a shared purpose. Children gathered in the square to watch. Elders brought stories of how the bell had once rung on every hour, calling farmers in from the fields, announcing births, marriages, and mourning. "It used to sound like hope," one woman said. "Now it sounds like nothing." "We'll give it a new voice," Elias replied. And he meant it. On the 10th day, they began the hoist. The new central shaft, crafted from reinforced steel and polished by hand, was winched into the tower using pulleys mounted across scaffolding. It took 32 men and women to raise it. When it finally slid into place with a grinding groan, a cheer rose up from the square below. Then came the new clapper, forged by the blacksmith and tuned by Elias himself. It was smaller than the original, lighter, but cleaner in sound, more precise. At last, with everything in place, Elias and Lucas climbed the tower one final time. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the wreckage of the town. Elias stood before the bell and placed his hand on the mechanism's lever. Then he looked to Lucas. "Would you like to do it?" Lucas blinked. "Me? You've earned it." The boy stepped forward. He took the lever in both hands and pulled. The sound that followed was unlike anything the town had heard before. It was not loud. It was not grand. It was pure. A single, perfect note rang through the valley, echoing off mountains, carried by the wind. Windows opened. Children stopped playing. Old men wept. It was as if the city had exhaled for the first time in years. Time, once again, had found its voice. That evening, Elias and Lucas stood outside the cathedral, watching people light candles along the cobblestones. "You didn't have to help," Lucas said. "I did," Elias replied. "Why?" He looked down at the boy. "Because time doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone. And I've forgotten that." Lucas said nothing for a while. Then he asked, "And now?" Elias turned his gaze to the bell tower. "Now I remember." Chapter 6. The Last Hour. Time, in Vensbruck, did not announce itself with fanfare. It came in small ways. In the crocus pushing through frost-bitten soil, in the way the wind shifted from bitter to brisk, in how the children's laughter returned to the courtyards as the snows finally gave way to sunlight. Inside the shop on Bruckenstrasse, the clocks no longer ticked for silence. They ticked for legacy. 3 months had passed since the storm. The cathedral bell now rang on every hour, its new chime a marker not just of time, but of rebirth. The townspeople spoke of Elias Grunwald with respect now, some even with reverence. They left gifts at his doorstep. They waved when he passed. And once, to his astonishment, a little girl handed him a daisy and called him Clockman. He had smiled, and no one had seen that in decades. But time, Elias knew, was not something you held. It was something you gave, which is why, one morning in early June, he called Lucas to the workbench and placed before him a box. "This is for you," Elias said. Lucas blinked, looking at the old wood, the metal hinges, the inlaid carving of a tree whose roots curled into gears. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Did you make it? Elias nodded. A long time ago, for someone I never got to give it to. Lucas looked up. Mathis. Yes. He opened the box. Inside was a toolkit. Not new, but lovingly maintained. Screwdrivers, oil brushes, a loop, calipers, a timegrapher. And at the bottom, beneath a felt lining, was a watch. A simple one. Elegant. Handmade. The initials LB were engraved on the inside. Lucas stared at it. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Elias said. Just promise me something. Anything. When the time comes, pass it on. Give it to someone who needs to know how to listen. To time. To people. Lucas nodded, his eyes shining. That summer, they worked side by side more than ever. But it was different now. Elias no longer guided every motion. Lucas made his own designs, crafted his own pieces. He repaired a broken music box for a widowed teacher. He built a wall clock shaped like a violin for the town hall. And he restored a century-old timekeeper found buried in the ruins of the abandoned train station. Word of the apprentice spread. Soon, people began asking for him by name. Where's the young clockmaker? Is Lucas here today? Elias watched it happen without jealousy. He watched it happen with pride. In early September, Elias fell ill. It wasn't sudden. It was the kind of sickness that comes with age and acceptance, the slowing of breath, the softening of footsteps. He stayed in bed more. He read his journals aloud to Lucas, pointing out mistakes, laughing at old frustrations, pausing at memories too heavy to speak aloud. One day, he handed Lucas a key. It opens the cabinet beneath the floorboards. There's a blueprint there. For what? For the clock we never built. Lucas found it that night. It was magnificent. A tower clock, taller than the cathedrals, with glass panels and rotating moon dials, designed to mark not just hours, but seasons and equinoxes. It had been Mathis's idea. Do you want me to build it? Lucas asked the next morning. Elias was silent a long time. Then, no, I want you to make it better. As autumn came, so did the final days. Elias grew quieter. His hands, once so precise, could no longer hold tools. But his voice remained clear. And one night, as Lucas sat beside him, polishing the toolkit he had received, Elias spoke the words that would stay with him forever. Time is not just gears and hands and springs. It's the weight of a heartbeat, the pause between questions, the way silence listens when no one else does. Lucas nodded, tears on his cheeks. I'll remember. I know you will, Elias said. And with that, he closed his eyes. The clocks in the shop ticked on. But for the first time in over 60 years, Elias Grunwald did not win them. Lucas did. The funeral was small. Clara read from one of Elias's journals. The mayor gave a speech about memory and time and how one man had rebuilt the heart of the town. But it was Lucas who spoke last. He stood at the front of the church, no longer a boy, not yet a man, and held up the watch Elias had made for him. He taught me how to fix clocks, Lucas said, but more than that, he taught me how to hear people, how to repair what can't always be seen. He paused. He gave me his time, and now I'll spend mine well. Months later, a new sign hung above the shop. El Bowman Horologiste. Below it, smaller print read, in honor of E. Grunwald, who gave time back to the world. And inside, behind the counter, the clocks ticked on, but they no longer ticked for silence. They ticked for life, for legacy, and for all the hours still to come. We hope you've enjoyed listening to the Clockmaker of Vensbruck as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to life for you. If this story moved you, taught you something, or simply helped you slow down and reflect, that means the world to us. Here at PastUnboxedAudioBooks, we put our hearts into unearthing meaningful, timeless stories that leave a mark. But we can only keep doing it with your support. So if you liked what you heard, please hit that like button, leave us a comment, and most importantly, share this story with a friend who'd love it too. Every like, every comment, every share, it's not just support. It's how you keep these stories alive. It's how you help us keep going. Thank you for listening. And until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay tuned. You're always welcome here at PastUnboxedAudioBooks.